This is the certificate of approval that would appear at the beginning of a movie that passed the Decency Code you've probably heard of, the Haze Code. The code was in effect from 1934 to 1968. The story of how the code came to be is, I think, one of the most fascinating stories in movie history. It's the early 1920s. There are a few scandals in Hollywood at this time, and the religious right is putting pressure on the movie industry to clean up its act. Movies, they think, are becoming too sexy and too violent. Keep in mind that movies are silent at this time. Synchronized sound, to offer another dimension to be offended by, doesn't come along until 1927's The Jazz Singer. One of the most infamous Hollywood scandals involves comedian and film star Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. The trial of Arbuckle has been discussed extensively, so I won't go into the full story here. If you haven't heard of the case, you only need to know that Arbuckle was accused of injuring an actress in a hotel room. The actress died a few days later. There were 3 trials. Arbuckle was ultimately acquitted, but guilty in the eyes of the public. He died before he was able to get his career back on track. An example of a movie that's getting negative attention at this time is Manslaughter from 1922, directed by Cecil B. DeMille. It's about a thrill-seeking young woman who accidentally kills a motorcycle cop. During the trial, someone compares her reckless behavior to the fall of the Roman Empire. So, if you're Cecil B. DeMille, you throw in a Roman orgy. The religious right is demanding that Hollywood put the brakes on. Hollywood didn't want the government to step in and censor movies. They wanted to fix the problem themselves. They needed someone to come in and act as a public relations person and be the face of decency. And this was the face they chose. They picked William H. Haze to be the new movie czar. So, who is William Haze? He was the chairman of the Republican National Committee from 1918 to 1921. He managed the successful 1920 presidential campaign of Warren G. Harding. Harding then appointed Haze to his cabinet as the first Postmaster General. Haze resigned from the cabinet in 1922 to become the first chairman of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. This group would later become the MPAA that we know today. Oh, and Haze was an elder in the Presbyterian Church. This photo was taken at the first meeting of the MPPDA on March 10, 1922. And, like Thanksgiving dinner, all of the heavy hitters are sitting at the adult table. In 1922, he moved into his office and was eager to start cleaning up the movie industry. The response to Haze getting this new position was immediate. A telegram dated April 6, 1922 reads, "Story from Rome states Pope in yesterday's message expressed himself as pleased with what public-spirited citizens and Catholic bishops in the United States have done to elevate the cinema. Stop. Have cabled for complete text. Martin Quigley." History doesn't know it yet, but Martin Quigley is going to become one of the authors of the Haze Code that will change Hollywood. Quigley was a devout Catholic. When he died in 1964, the New York Times described him as the co-author of the Motion Picture Industry's Production Code. Quigley was opposed to censorship. He simply didn't want material he thought was indecent in movies in the first place. But back to William Haze. Here's footage of William Haze from yesterday's newsreel. Notice that the footage praises Haze and criticizes the movies that Hollywood makes.
Bigger and better movies are coming out of Hollywood. They're making more pictures faster, and more money faster. And rough, raw plots with suggestive titles are packing the theaters at every performance. With movies at their lowest moral ebb, but riding high financially, a new name appears on the national scene. Will Haze. It's 1920, and here Haze is harvesting the votes that send Warren Harding to the White House. Yes, Will Haze surprises America by becoming first Republican president maker in 8 years. There's no hint here that Haze will soon bow out of politics to become biggest and most important man in motion pictures in 20s and 30s. In fact, family man Haze in 1921 accepts reward for his campaign work by becoming Postmaster General in Harding's cabinet. But 1 year later, he resigns to become head of Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. And his reign in Hollywood is big boon to already booming industry.
It wasn't just the Pope who noticed the new position Haze had in the movie business. His job title and physical appearance made him an easy target. Here are 2 comics that show Haze coming to save and clean up Hollywood. Artists had fun with caricatures at Haze's expense. The Three Stooges took a shot at Haze in their short from 1940, No Census, No Feeling. Curly delivers a line that goes by so quickly, I have to wonder who picked up on it in 1940 or since.
That's that. Wait a minute, flathead. We just got a job. We're working for the census.
You mean Will Haze?
No, the census, the census. We get 4 cents a name for taking the census.
Haze accepted his position in 1922, but the production code wasn't seriously enforced until 1934. What took so long? Haze and the other people in his organization are working from offices in California and New York. The pace of business must have been very slow. We have some letters that went to and from the Haze office, and they tell the story that Hollywood was slow to accept the change. Here's a letter to Haze from Warner Brothers. Haze has obviously written to the studio, and this is the response from Albert Warner, dated September 20th, 1922. Although the outline of the organization mentioned in your communication undoubtedly has many virtues, we can also see several defects from our point of view. After all is said and done, we are all in the business for profit. And while it is true that we are not seeking to do anything wrong in order to obtain this profit, we have found out from experience that a picture must be successful commercially in order to do any amount of good. Haze continues his work. It's now a few years later. A priest named Father Daniel Lord is brought in to help with the production code, and that decision was given a blessing by a cardinal. Father Daniel Lord was well known in those days. He had already served Hollywood as a technical consultant. Existing decency codes were examined to help their production code take shape. Father Lord wrote much of an early draft of the code that was presented to Haze in 1929. When Haze saw it, he said, "My eyes nearly popped out when I read it. This was the very thing I had been looking for." Someone with the initials CEM wrote an inter-office memo to Haze on March 8, 1930, with notes about the movie Party Girl from the same year. Party Girl was directed by Victor Halperin, who also directed White Zombie with Bela Lugosi. According to Wikipedia, Party Girl holds the record for the longest time a movie was banned in the United Kingdom from its release in 1930 to 2003. CEM is Carl E. Milliken, the executive secretary of the MPPDA. Previous to that, he was the 51st governor of Maine. Jack Warner wrote a letter dated March 18, 1930, and sent it to Haze in New York. The subject was the use of profanity in 2 Warner Brothers movies, Under a Texas Moon and The Green Goddess. Warner defends the movies, saying they were produced 11 months ago. After 12 long years with Haze in office, the production code of decency was enforced in 1934. It was written by a handful of Catholic priests and men of faith. William Haze didn't write it, but it ultimately became known as the Haze Code. People refer to it as the list of don'ts and be carefuls. There are certain things you absolutely cannot show in a movie, other things you can show, you just need to be careful. It starts simply enough with no picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Hence the sympathy of the audience shall never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. The technique of murder must be presented in a way that will not inspire imitation. Brutal killings are not to be presented in detail. The sanctity of the institution of marriage in the home shall be upheld. Adultery, sometimes necessary plot material, must not be explicitly treated or justified or presented attractively. Sex relationships between white and black races is forbidden. Pointed profanity, this includes the words God, Lord, Jesus Christ, is forbidden. Complete nudity is never permitted. Undressing scenes should be avoided and never used save where essential to the plot. Homosexuality was referred to in the code as impure love, the love which society has always regarded as wrong and which has been banned by divine law. Impure love must not be presented as attractive and beautiful. In his autobiography, Haze said, "Some years after its adoption, it was remarked by hostile critics that since its original authors had both been Catholics and one a Jesuit priest, the code must necessarily be considered a Catholic instrument designed to force Catholic theology on the screen. Nothing could be more absurd. Even before I read their joint draft, I knew my men well enough to realize that matters of dogma would have no bearing." Now, I think Haze honestly believed what he said, but notice that the Haze Code is written as if the only people going to the movies are white, straight, Christian men. It's also not hard to notice that certain parts of the code are taken right out of the Ten Commandments, so I disagree with his statement. I think Haze must have been a decent guy. He probably would have been a great next-door neighbor. It's interesting to me that history ultimately remembers him as Hollywood's fun killer. The next time you watch a movie made during the golden age of Hollywood, remember that what you're seeing carefully made it through the minefield of the Haze Code, and you'll see movie history differently. Where this gets interesting is that the exploitation filmmaker didn't care about the Haze Code. Their movies didn't get shown in legitimate theaters, but grindhouses and drive-ins. They threw in nudity or just about anything they wanted. In part 2, I'll have examples of the Haze Code in effect and how Hollywood directors got around it. Thank you for watching, subscribe to see more, and leave a comment.